Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another week. Announcements before we get started. July 5th, this Sunday, I will be preaching at Calvary Bible Church. So if you haven't heard enough of my lovely voice through the internet, then please come out and support me this Sunday. It'd be really nice to see some of you guys who I haven't gotten to see since the end of quarantine or the beginning of the pandemic, whatever, I just haven't seen you guys. It'd be really cool to see some of you guys again. So if you so desire, 10:30, Calvary Bible Church, and I will be preaching. So please come out. It should be hopefully a good time and an informative time. Now, last week we started into the 10 Commandments. We're doing them out of order though because I can't count or something. I don't know. But we're doing them out of order. We covered murder last week, and we talked about how basically all people have worth and that murdering is an act against God himself by destroying his creation and also removing God's timing out of it. It's you taking control of when a person lives or dies, when God's the one who has the right to decide that. So, murdering is wrong because it destroys God's creation, and God is the one in charge ultimately. And it destroys someone that God decides his value. And we need to make sure that every person is hearing the gospel. So don't murder people, gospel them. I think the word is proselytize or evangelize. That's the word, I'm sorry. Don't murder people, evangelize them. Okay, cool. That's a good recap of last week. This week, we're going to be talking about the very first commandment of the 10 Commandments. But before we get there, let's talk about a little bit of history, right? So, we covered Exodus in Fusion, but for those of you that may be watching this video because you randomly stumbled upon it on wherever, Exodus, we got Israelites move into Egypt because of a famine. They settle in the land of Gonash because that's kind of the only place they can go, and it's really good for their livestock, which apparently the Egyptians didn't really view farming livestock as a very good profession. So they were like, whatever, use this land to farm your livestock. We don't care. And the Israelites are there, they start multiplying, they're doing really well, and they end up outnumbering the Egyptians. Well, maybe not outnumbering, but there's a lot of them, and the Pharaoh starts to fear them, so he enslaves them instead, and then they continue to grow, and even though they're being oppressed, they continue to grow. Oh my gosh, what does Pharaoh do to stop them? He decrees that all the babies who are male that are born are to be thrown into the Nile. Most babies can't swim, from my experience, so this is not a good thing. Moses' mother decides not to surrender him to the people, and she hides him as long as he can. She can no longer do it, so she puts him in a little reed basket, puts him in the river, and hides him right there. Miriam is watching nearby, his sister, and then Pharaoh's daughter comes by, finds him, and is like, whoa, a baby, that's cool, I'll adopt it. And then Miriam is like, hey, I know a woman that could take care of that baby for you. And so Moses' mother gets paid to take care of Moses until he's old enough. Then he's adopted into the household of Pharaoh. He's raised, education, status, resources, whatever. He has it all. Eventually, he defends a Hebrew slave and ends up killing a Egyptian. And he buries him in the sand and thinks no one knows, but then suddenly people know about it. Oh my gosh, what does he do? He runs into the wilderness. And he stays there for a while. I don't remember how long. I want to say 40 years, but I could be wrong about that. Someone fact check me, please. He runs off. He's in the desert for a while. He ends up finding a wife. He finds a job as a shepherd. And while he's out watching the sheep one day, he finds a burning bush, and it's God. And God's like, yo, you're going to go back, and you're going to free my people. And then Moses is like, I am. And God's like, no, I am. I thought that joke would land better. Anyway, so Moses goes, he goes into Pharaoh, let my people go. And plagues happen because Pharaoh is a stubborn jerk. And all the people are freed and they get to leave Egypt. Now, if you look at the archaeological evidence, that's either sometime around the 1400 BC or 1200 BC. Depending on which archaeological evidence you're looking at and which archaeologist you talk to. But there is slightly more, logically it would make more sense for the 1400 BC. It's not an exact number, it's an estimate. A 1400 BC Exodus as opposed to a 1200 BC Exodus. But there is kind of evidence to support both, and archaeology is not an exact science, so it's really hard to date things. Regardless, they leave Egypt, and they end up going into the wilderness, they cross the Red Sea, and they end up next to Mount Sinai. And God gives a bunch of commands, and he's going to come down, and he's going to talk to his people. So now we get to this point. A lot of people think that the Ten Commandments were given to Israel. They were given to Moses on the mountaintop, and Moses goes down and gives it to the people. But in reality, God himself is addressing the Israelites when he's giving the Ten Commandments. He descends on the mountain and yells from the mountain. After the Ten Commandments are done, in Exodus 20, verse 18, it says, "Now all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet, the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. And they said to Moses, 'You speak with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die.'" And so basically, God spoke directly to Israel, the Ten Commandments, and they freaked out. So yeah, they weren't too happy with it. But that's the context where we're at. We're at Mount Sinai. God himself is addressing the Israelite nation. And he starts with, in Exodus 20, verse 1, he says, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me." That's the first commandment, that you shall have no other gods before me. And frankly, when I read that, I was like, where do I go with that necessarily? I mean, there are a lot of places you probably could go, but at the same time, which one do you choose? And I decided that I would actually use the skills I learned in my Hebrew class, and we're going to go through and look at the Hebrew of this and kind of parse it apart, right? Specifically, we're going to be looking at verse 3, "And you shall have no other gods before me." The way it's formatted in Hebrew, you know what, I'll just read you guys the Hebrew, and you can make fun of the way I pronounce it because it's funny. And if there's any Hebrew scholars watching this, I apologize because I'm about to butcher this pronunciation like terribly. So it's Lo Yeh Leka Elohim Achrim al Panyaya. And that is, no shall have you gods other before me, because that's how Hebrew is formatted. Lo Yeh Laka Elohim Achrim al Penya. There's no roll on that, I'm sorry. So if you look at it, the first word is no, right? And then it says shall have. And I was very confused, or I was curious about this shall have, so I looked it up. And it's in the form known as qual imperfect. Now, qual is the most basic form of a Hebrew word. It's kind of like an infinitive in English, but the thing is that it's usually past tense, and it's so it's like I keep, or it's actually you keep, and that's the basic form, qual. Yep. Okay. Now, the imperfect though implies it's not necessarily an incomplete action, but it's a continuous kind of action. It's an action that doesn't really, it just kind of starts and then keeps going, right? And so a qual imperfect is you shall have, and it's not just like a you shall not have now, you shall not have in the past, in the present, and in the future. It's a very continuous action. There is basically no end to it. So it's about more of a lifestyle. You shall not have. And so it's through your entire life, from the past to the end, from the beginning to the end, you shall not have other gods. Okay? And so that's what God is asking from us. He's asking us for a continuous lifestyle of dedication. And it's you shall not have other gods. Never have. And so it's really, that's a big order, And what's really interesting, you guys might have noticed I've said the word Elohim in there. It's Elohim Achrim, and that means other gods. Now, why is Elohim used as other gods? Well, the thing about it is that Elohim, the word, is often used for God. If you go to Genesis 1, it will say Elohim when reference to God. The thing about Elohim, though, the I am ending, it is third person plural. So it actually should say gods. And so that was really what the word means, is gods. But You have to tell by the context of what the actual usage is. So achachrim, you see how it's got the im at the end. It's reference. It connects the ending. It connects other and gods. So Elohim acharim. It's other gods. It's an adjective added on, and that's how we know it's not talking about God. It's talking about other gods. It's not talking about big G God. It's talking about little g God. And that's how we know is by the context. I know I basically created a problem to explain the problem to you, but in case you guys were wondering. So that's how we know in this passage, because Elohim actually just means God in general. It actually is supposed to mean gods, and so we have to know by the context what it means. But in this context, it's saying other gods. And you have to know that by looking at context. And so we talked about shall have as a continuous lifestyle. We talked about Elohim as being used in the way of other gods right now. Other being the adjective that's connected to gods. And then also at the end, we have this word before. It's a preposition. It's the same in English. It's the one that's al in this word, in this. So if you look it up, it also could, in Hebrew, it more means above or over. Now, why did they not translate it that way? I don't know. They didn't ask me. And frankly, my Hebrew is not good enough. I'm sure they had a valid reason. But the word before there could also mean above or over. And so if we think about this, in the context of what God is asking us, he says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods above or over. And I think it's really important to think about that because, it's so easy to find other things to worship, and I don't want to step on the toes of myself next week, because the thing is that if you look at the next verse, which we're going to talk about next week, in verse 4, it says, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness or anything that is in heaven above, or is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. And I'm not going to go too far in that because I want to talk about that next week. But I kind of wondered, why do we have, you shall have no other gods before me, and then the other one is, you shall not make yourself a carved image? Well, I think in my mind, one of them is heart, and the other one is action. And if you don't have verse 3 correctly incorporated into your life, verse 4 is the very natural next step. Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the abundance of our heart, we do things, And so when God is saying here, you should not have any other gods before me, I think he's really referring to the heart of it. Because it is so easy to seek after other things and to seek after other gods in a way. I mean, we think about our life today. I feel like I hear about people just either, from just listening to some of you guys at Fusion, it sounds like a lot of what you do is like Netflix, Fortnite, I've heard that one a couple times, basketball, or, I guess it's a pretty decent list. But those are things that take up a lot of your time. Those are things that take a lot of your thought process, a lot of your, whatever it might be. And I've heard one time said, I think it was by a guy by the name of Doug Weiss, he said, what you go to in moments of difficulty is your God. And so, if it's very easy, to say, oh, if you know someone who's an addict, right, and they something happens in their life, what's the first thing they do? They want to go to that thing that they're addicted to, whatever it is, alcohol, pornography, pills, whatever it is. When something goes wrong in their life, the first thing they want to do is go to that. And that is because that has become their God. Their gut reaction is not to pray. Their gut reaction is not to, even try to handle the situation on their own. Their first reaction is to go seek after something to change the situation that they're in. And so we have to deal with the heart of this. And so when we are looking at, you shall have no other gods before me, what does our heart think about God? And I know that this was something I personally really struggled with. Because as many of you know, I was raised in the church. I like basically anytime the church doors were open, I felt like my family was there. And I really struggled with personally, how do I view God? And when I was a kid, I struggled a lot with, well, God's just kind of an almighty jerk who just tells you off all the time, and frankly, some of that was because that's how some of my Sunday school teachers treated me. And your perception of God can get really screwed up. And so when we're thinking about God, what is your perception of God? Do you view God as benevolent, almighty, powerful? Do you view God as loving? Do you view God as evil? There are so many things about how we view God that changes so much. I mean, if you ask people like Richard Dawkins is the first person that comes to my mind. He has made up his mind that he doesn't like God because God is, how did he describe him? I don't remember the way he describes him basically is whiny, attention-seeking, and mean, basically, for lack of a better term. And so the way that he views God directly influences how he views the world and how he thinks about things. And so when we are thinking about God and when we are hearing, you shall have no other gods before me, I think we really need to think about, who is this me? You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, but who is God to us? And personally, a lot of the things I listed, except for evil, I think God is all of them. I think that he is almighty and all-powerful. He is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent. He is just, loving, merciful, gracious. I'm running out of adjectives. But God is all those things. He loves us, even when we don't deserve to be loved. And if we are looking only at one part of God, we start to lose who God really is, And I think that another difficulty that people have with God is that our God, we can't control, When you have a God like, let's just say Netflix, for lack of a better example. I'm not accusing anybody, but if your God is Netflix, something goes wrong, and you decide, I'm going to go to Netflix because I just want to watch something and escape for a while. You have so much control. You can get on there and you can watch Stranger Things. You can get on there and you can watch, I haven't had Netflix in a really long time. I don't even know what's on there anymore. Riverdale? Anyway, you can get on there and pick what you want to watch. That is something you can control. Netflix is something you control. We can't do that with God. When something goes wrong in our lives, we can't control God. When there are pagan believers who worship this God and they go, if we do X, Y, and Z, it will rain. And then X, Y, and Z happens. And then rain comes because that's how nature works. They go, oh, we did this and that's what happened. They think they control it in some way. Our God can't be controlled. And so he controls himself, is the bottom line. And so when we are talking about having no other gods before me, we have to make sure that we are viewing God correctly. Because if we don't view God correctly, sometimes it can get really easy to go, well, this God doesn't meet my needs. He doesn't do what I need him to do. He doesn't answer to me the way I would like him to answer. I can't control him and make him do what I want him to do. And so we start to seek other gods. We seek gods that we can control. We seek gods that fulfill our needs now, that make us feel better now. And that doesn't necessarily help us in the long run. And so I'm not going to preach to you guys about, you need to stop watching Netflix. You need to stop playing Fortnite. You need to, because in moderation, those are good things. Kind of. depending what you watch on Netflix. Those are good things. But we have to make sure that we aren't trying to replace God with those things. When something goes wrong in our lives, are we going to God first? Are we praying about it? Are we going to His Scripture? Are we listening to worship music? Are we reading through the Psalms? Are we worshiping God even when things are going wrong? And I'm not going to pretend that this is an easy thing to do. Honestly, I struggle with it a lot too. Because as I said, sometimes God doesn't work on the timetable that we want Him to. And that's really discouraging. And it's really hard. And I've said to my wife before, I know that God has a plan for me. And I know He's going to put me somewhere. But if He would tell me where we were going, I would really appreciate it. But this is the God that deserves to be worshipped. The only one worth worshiping. These other gods that I've listed off, the pagan ones that people used to follow, ones they used to sacrifice their children to, they aren't worth following at the end of the day. They might make you feel good for a moment. But at the end of the day, they don't do anything for you. The modern gods that we build up for ourselves, the god of society, maybe even the government, of Netflix, of Fortnite, of pornography, whatever it might be, it makes you feel good now, in this moment. But ultimately, it's going to leave you feeling empty. It's going to leave you feeling hollow. And God's the only thing that doesn't do that. God is the only thing that helps us in the long run. And so, we shall have no other gods before us, or for Him. We shall have no other gods above Him. We shall have no other gods over Him. And we are to continually do this through our entire life. And our lives are going to change. Things are going to happen. We're going to have strong spots. We're going to have weak spots. But the thing that we have to do is repent and move forward. God is a great God. And so we must do our best to follow Him and to put Him above other gods and not other gods above Him. Thank you guys for watching my video. I hope you learned something today about God, about Hebrew, whatever it might be. I'm sorry if I mispronounced some of the stuff, but I love you guys. I can't wait to see you guys again, and I will have another video for you guys next week.